Summer sunlight in Newport filtered through the stained-glass windows of St. Mary's by the Sea, scattering across the white-tiled floor in vibrant, dancing ribbons. The atmosphere inside the small seaside chapel was thick with excitement. Soft whispers from guests, gentle laughter, eager eyes fixed on the grand doors where the bride would soon appear. At the altar, Graham Lennox stood tall in his elegant black suit. At 38, after 2 years living in the shadow of widowhood, he finally believed he had touched happiness again. A smile, both anxious and radiant, spread across his lips, as if the slightest breeze could scatter the emotions swelling inside him. "You look amazing, Dad," 8-year-old Theo Lennox whispered. His small fingers toyed with the velvet ring pillow, his neatly combed brown curls and tiny suit perfectly mirroring his father's. But while Graham glowed with joy, Theo's brown eyes brimmed with worry. Graham glanced down at his son and winked reassuringly. "Thanks, buddy. I'm the lucky one, having such an incredible ring-bearer." He placed a gentle hand on Theo's head, completely unaware of the tension carved into the boy's young face. Then the first notes of the wedding march echoed. The congregation rose as one, every gaze swinging toward the entrance. Everyone waited breathlessly for the bride's arrival. Everyone. Except Theo. The boy's eyes remained locked on his father. His fingers tightened around the ring pillow until his knuckles turned white. The doors opened slowly, and Autumn Harper appeared. She looked as though she had stepped out of a perfect bridal painting. A white lace gown hugging her figure, silk train fluttering softly in the ocean breeze. Her golden hair cascaded like a waterfall over her shoulders, and her blue eyes shimmered with something unreadable. Autumn walked down the aisle in steady steps, each one prompting a soft sigh of admiration from the pews. "You look stunning," Graham breathed when she reached him. She smiled, her whisper as soft as waves brushing over sand. "I can't wait to start our new life together." Reverend Peterson, a silver-haired minister with a kind face, began the ceremony. His measured voice filled the warm space, but to Theo, every line, every passing second felt like a needle piercing his chest. He shifted from foot to foot, eyes darting between his father and Autumn. To adults watching, he simply seemed nervous for the wedding. But the truth was deeper, darker, far more urgent. Standing there, Theo felt himself pulled back into memories from the past months. Back to the first day Dad brought her home, to the things he'd seen, heard, known. And with every hair on his head, every beat of his young heart, Theo understood one thing. He could not let this wedding happen. He could not let that woman destroy their lives, destroy Dad. But what could an 8-year-old do? How could he make every adult in this church believe the truth, when even his father, the person he loved and trusted most, didn't believe him? Reverend Peterson paused and spoke the traditional words. "If anyone has a just cause why this couple may not lawfully be joined in marriage, speak now, or forever hold your peace." Silence fell. This was Theo's chance, his only moment. But fear clamped around his chest. What if he was wrong? What if no one believed him? What if he ruined his father's happiest day? All because of a child's fear. Reverend Peterson nodded, preparing to continue. Theo's heart pounded so hard it felt as if it would tear through his ribs. Now or never. "Stop!" The shout burst out before he could think. "Stop this wedding!" The entire chapel froze. And before we continue, if you're following this story and finding it gripping, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss the videos I release every day. It truly helps me keep telling more stories for you. But what could drive an 8-year-old boy to this point? What pushed him to the brink of tearing apart what was supposed to be his father's happiest moment? To understand that, we have to go back to last fall, to where everything truly began. It was a crisp autumn afternoon in Newport, when the maple leaves had turned shades of red and shimmering gold, and the breath of the ocean carried a hint of the early winter creeping in. Graham picked Theo up from Newport Harbor Elementary, his face glowing with a kind of excitement Theo hadn't seen since his mother was still alive. "Son, there's someone special I want you to meet," Graham said, his voice nearly bubbling as they drove home. The Lennox Lighthouse Cottage, their small, charming house, sat just a few minutes' walk from Old Point Judith Lighthouse. Theo's stomach tightened with a mix of curiosity and unease. After his mother died from cancer 2 years earlier, it had been just the two of them. They had built their own little routines: Saturday morning pancakes, evening walks along the cliff walk, and bedtime stories on the old sofa his mother had loved. The thought of someone new slipping into those sacred spaces made Theo unsure if he was ready. When they reached home, a woman was waiting on the porch. Her blonde hair caught the afternoon sunlight, and when she smiled, Theo saw his father's eyes light up in a way that made the boy's chest tighten. "Theo, this is Autumn," Graham introduced, pride warming his voice. She's become very important to me, and I hope she'll be important to you, too." Autumn knelt down to Theo's eye level, her blue eyes gleaming like the early winter sea. "It's so nice to finally meet you, Theo," she said gently. "Your dad talks about you all the time." In that moment, Theo felt a flicker of hope. Maybe things would be okay. Maybe. But as the weeks passed, that flicker slowly dimmed. Theo began noticing strange things. Autumn was completely different when his father wasn't around. The warm smiles vanished, replaced by a coldness, stiff, sharp, and unsettling. One evening was etched especially deep into Theo's memory. Graham had to work late at the architecture firm, and Autumn was put in charge of watching Theo. While they sat at the dinner table, Theo tried to make conversation. "Miss Autumn, do you like space? We're learning about the solar system at school and—" "Theo." Autumn cut him off, her voice as sharp as a blade, eyes fixed on her phone. "I'm busy. Eat. Quiet." Theo froze, shrinking into his chair. He pushed food around on his plate, the silence between them heavy enough to choke on. But when Graham was present, everything shifted colors again. Autumn asked Theo about his day, laughed at his silly stories, and even patted his head in moments that looked almost affectionate. But Theo could feel the falseness in her smile, could see the tension flickering beneath those perfect blue eyes. While Theo grew increasingly uneasy, Graham was happier than he'd been at any point since his wife died. He practically floated around the house, humming old tunes, even breaking into sudden dance steps that should have embarrassed Theo, if they weren't so delightfully goofy. "Isn't Autumn wonderful?" Graham often asked, his eyes shining. "We're so lucky to have her in our lives, aren't we, buddy?" Theo would nod, forcing a smile. He didn't have the heart to shatter the joy his father had finally rediscovered. But deep inside, the 8-year-old boy felt only emptiness, and a growing, gnawing confusion. As the weeks turned into months, Autumn's true nature slowly revealed itself to Theo. She began making clipped, cutting remarks, only when Graham wasn't around. "Oh, Theo," she sighed, eyeing the mess he made while working on a school project. "You're really difficult to manage. I don't understand how your dad puts up with it." Or when he excitedly showed her a good test score. "Very nice, sweetheart. But you know, there's always room for improvement." Each comment felt like a small carving into Theo's self-worth, making him feel like a burden in the very home he had grown up in. He began withdrawing, spending more time in his room, avoiding shared spaces, afraid of catching Autumn's scrutinizing stare. Then, about 3 months before the wedding, something happened. Something Theo could never erase from his memory. It was a Saturday afternoon. Graham had gone out to run errands, leaving Theo and Autumn alone in the house. He was sitting in the living room, watching cartoons and sipping his juice when Autumn walked in. "Turn that off," she snapped, pointing sharply at the TV. "Too loud. I'm trying to work." Theo flinched and fumbled with the remote. In his hurry, his elbow knocked over his juice. Liquid spilled across the coffee table and seeped into the carpet. "I'm sorry," Theo yelped, scrambling for napkins. "I didn't mean—" But before he could do anything, Autumn was already storming toward him. Her fingers clamped around his arm as she yanked him away from the mess. "Look at what you've done," she hissed, her face twisted with anger. "Such a clumsy, careless child." Theo winced from the pain, tears springing to his eyes. "I'm sorry. I'll clean it. I promise." Autumn's eyes narrowed, sharp as blades. "You'd better," she growled. "And if you open your mouth and tell your father, you will regret it deeply. Understand?" Theo nodded frantically, his heart pounding. The moment she released him, he rushed to clean up the spill, his hands trembling the entire time. That evening, when Graham returned home, Autumn greeted him with a bright smile and a kiss as sweet as sugar. "You're finally back, darling," she said in a tender voice. From the staircase, Theo stood quietly in the shadows watching them. He rubbed the sore spot on his arm where Autumn's fingers had dug in. His eyes dropped, and a deep loneliness seeped into every breath he took, heavier than anything he had ever felt before. As the wedding day drew closer, Theo found himself struggling under the weight of a secret he didn't dare speak aloud. He wanted, desperately wanted, to tell his father what Autumn was truly like. But fear held him back. What if Dad didn't believe him? What if telling the truth only made Autumn angrier? And even worse. One evening, about a month before the wedding, Theo finally gathered enough courage to approach his father. Graham was sitting in his study, reviewing some documents, when Theo gently knocked on the door. "Come in, son," Graham called with a warm smile. "What's going on?" Theo stepped inside, his fingers twisting the hem of his shirt. "Dad," he said slowly, "can I talk to you about something?" Graham immediately set his papers aside and gave Theo his full attention. "Of course, you can tell me anything. What is it?" Theo took a deep breath, then blurted out, "It's about Miss Autumn. I don't think she likes me." Graham's brows furrowed. "What do you mean, Theo? Autumn adores you." "No, Dad, she doesn't." Theo spoke quickly, as if afraid he'd lose the nerve if he slowed down. "When you're not there, she's different. She ignores me, and sometimes she says things—" Hold on. Slow down." Graham lifted a hand to stop him. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Theo, I know this is a big change for you. It's normal to feel unsure. But I promise you, Autumn cares about you a lot." "But, Dad—" Theo tried again. "No buts, son," Graham said firmly. "Autumn is going to be your stepmother. I need you to give her a chance. She's trying her best, just like we are. Okay?" Theo's shoulders collapsed, as if someone had pulled the entire world out from under him. "Yes, Dad," he whispered, then turned away. "Hey," Graham called after him gently. "I love you. Everything's going to be fine." But as Theo closed the door behind him, despair washed over him. Dad, the person he trusted more than anyone, hadn't believed him. Or worse, didn't want to believe. From that day on, Theo stopped trying to tell the truth. He withdrew, becoming quieter, smaller, and more timid. Graham, swept up in the whirlwind of wedding preparations and the glow of newfound happiness, didn't notice the change in his son. He assumed Theo's silence was shyness, or just a phase, never imagining the storm building inside the boy. Autumn, on the other hand, seemed to revel in her victory. With Graham oblivious, and Theo too afraid to speak up again, she grew bolder, more reckless and more cruel in her mistreatment. One afternoon, Theo accidentally overheard Autumn talking to her friend, Brooke. "You're really something," Brooke scoffed with a laugh. "Playing mom to someone else's kid? Couldn't be me." Theo froze in the hallway, his heart stopping cold. Autumn responded in a voice so sweet it sounded fake. "Oh, it's not that bad. Theo, well, he's part of the package, right? If you want the good, you have to put up with the bad." Brooke burst out laughing. "You're a saint. If I were you, I'd have sent him to boarding school ages ago." Theo didn't wait to hear more. He stepped back silently, then ran to his room and shut the door. It felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. Part of the package, the bad. Was that all he was to Autumn? Just an inconvenience she had to tolerate? To get to Dad? As the wedding day drew closer, Theo felt as though he were trapped in his own home. He watched his father and Autumn excitedly sketch out plans for the future. Their future, not a future for all three of them. They talked about honeymoon destinations, then about redecorating the house, with almost no thought about how any of it might affect Theo. The 8-year-old boy simply stood there, quiet as a shadow, invisible, unimportant. Then, exactly 2 weeks before the wedding, everything suddenly changed, and in a way Theo could never have imagined. It was a late night. The digital clock on Theo's nightstand blinked 11:42 p.m., its red glow slicing through the darkness of his bedroom. He tossed and turned, unable to fall asleep. Anxiety about the upcoming wedding gnawed at him relentlessly. Finally, Theo decided to go downstairs for some water. Lighthouse Cottage was eerily quiet at that hour, the only sound the distant waves tapping against the rocky shore. As Theo padded down the hallway in his Superman pajamas, he suddenly froze. A sharp, frustrated voice drifted from the living room. "Autumn. Trevor, you need to listen to me clearly," she hissed into the phone. Theo crouched slightly, peeking around the corner. Autumn was pacing back and forth, her blonde hair disheveled, her expression tight with tension. Even in her sleepwear, there was something about the way she moved, an edge that sent chills down Theo's spine. "We can't rush this. Everything has to be perfect. The wedding is only 2 weeks away. Once it's done, we move to phase 2. Phase 2? Theo's heart hammered. He knew eavesdropping was wrong, but his feet wouldn't move. "Yes, the insurance policy," Autumn whispered, lowering her voice. "Graham suspects nothing. Once the money is in our hands, everything changes. No more scams, no more close calls. This is our ticket out." Theo's breath caught. Money? Scam? Insurance policy? What was she talking about? "Look, Trevor," Autumn snapped, making Theo flinch. "The kid, Theo, is the only variable that could ruin this. He sees too much. But don't worry, I've got it handled. Graham is wrapped around my finger. He'll never believe anything against his perfect fiancée." Theo's eyes burned. He had always known Autumn didn't like him, but hearing her talk about him like some unwanted object, it hurt so much he could barely breathe. "As long as you're ready," Autumn finished. 2 weeks after the wedding, we make our move. Graham won't even see it coming." She hung up. Theo bolted back to his room, his heartbeat so loud he was sure Autumn could hear it. He dove under his blanket, curling up as if he could hide from the nightmare he had just witnessed. He didn't understand everything, but he knew one thing with painful clarity. Dad was in danger. Serious danger. Sleep completely abandoned Theo that night. He lay awake, hearing every word Autumn said echo in his mind like wind whistling through a cracked window. The next morning, with dark circles under his eyes, he dragged himself to the breakfast table. Graham and Autumn were already there, looking like the picture of a peaceful family. A picture so painfully fake, it nearly made Theo sick. "Morning, champ," Graham said cheerfully, ruffling Theo's hair. "You look tired. Rough night?" Theo nodded, avoiding Autumn's eyes. "I just couldn't sleep." Autumn's syrupy voice cut through the air. "Oh, poor thing. You must be so excited about the wedding, right, Theo?" Theo looked up. For just a split second, so brief most adults would have missed it, he caught a flash of cold calculation behind Autumn's gentle smile. A shiver crawled down his spine. "Yes," he lied, forcing a smile. Excited. In the days that followed, Theo watched Autumn like a hawk. Now that he knew for certain something was wrong, he began noticing details he had previously overlooked. Autumn was practically glued to her phone. Every time Graham walked into the room, she would immediately lock the screen and smile sweetly, as if nothing unusual had happened. "Just chatting with the wedding planner, darling," she would say. Or, "Oh, bridesmaid drama, you know how it is." But Theo knew better. Occasionally, he caught a glimpse of a contact labeled simply as T. T for Trevor, Theo guessed. The mysterious man he had heard during the late-night phone call. The more he observed, the more suspicious her absences from the house became. She constantly offered flimsy excuses to leave for hours at a time. Just finalizing a few wedding details, or fittings with the girls. Graham, blinded by love and buried in work, never questioned it. But Theo did, and he took note of everything. About a week before the wedding, Theo's opportunity arrived. Graham had an unexpected meeting at the architecture firm, and Autumn had vanished once again on some vague errand. The house was completely quiet. Theo knew he had only a tiny window of time. Heart pounding, he slipped into the living room, the place where Autumn usually left her sleek silver laptop. He knew it was strictly off-limits, and he understood that. But if this could save his father... The laptop was password-protected. Of course. Theo tried a few guesses. Autumn's birthday, the wedding date. Nothing worked. He was about ready to give up when he noticed a yellow sticky note peeking out from under the laptop. A string of characters. No way. Hands trembling, Theo typed the code. The screen lit up. The air felt frozen. Theo's eyes widened as he scrolled through Autumn's document list. There were dozens of files with deeply suspicious names. Graham's schedule, policy details, payment plan. He clicked on a file titled Insurance Policy. A PDF full of legal terminology appeared, most of which he didn't understand. But a few phrases hit him like blows. Accidental death. Double indemnity. $5 million payout. $5 million. Was that all his father was worth to Autumn? Theo's throat tightened. He kept searching. Inside a folder named Trevor, dozens of images appeared. A tall man with black hair and a scar above his left eyebrow. In some photos, he was standing alone. In others, he was standing beside Autumn, smiling intimately like a real couple. Theo's stomach twisted. Not only was Autumn planning to hurt his father, she was cheating on him. And at that exact moment, the sound of tires crunching on the driveway drifted through the window. Autumn was home. Panicked, Theo closed the laptop, double-checking every detail to make sure it looked untouched. He had barely managed to sit down when the door opened. "Theo, are you home?" Autumn called. "Yes," his voice trembled slightly. "I'm doing homework." Autumn appeared in the doorway, eyes narrowing. "You don't usually study in here, do you, Theo?" Theo shrugged, trying to appear casual. "It's quieter here." She stared at him for several seconds, long enough to make the back of his neck prickle, before she smiled, a smile that never reached her eyes. "Don't overwork yourself. Dinner's almost ready." As she turned away, Theo accidentally caught a glimpse of her phone screen. She was texting someone saved as T. That night, Theo lay in bed, every muscle tense like a pulled wire. Everything he had read, everything he had seen, each piece snapped together into a horrifying picture. Autumn and Trevor were planning to kill his father for the insurance money. They would wait until after the wedding, when she became Graham's legal wife. Then there would be an accident. An accident, Theo knew, would never be accidental. He had to tell someone. He had to do something. But who would believe an 8-year-old? Even Dad, the person he trusted the most, had once refused to believe him. And Autumn had already proven she could twist any story to suit her needs. Sleep eventually came, but it wasn't gentle. In his dreams, Theo saw Autumn and Trevor standing by a grave. His father's grave. Both of them laughing, their laughter echoing like knives slicing through his chest. Theo jolted awake, heart pounding like a drum. He knew one thing. If he didn't act soon, he would lose his father. Forever. The next few days passed in a heavy fog. Theo watched every move Autumn made, trying to piece together the fragments he'd uncovered to understand her full plan. But Autumn was careful. Painfully careful. She covered her tracks so well that she left almost nothing for anyone to find. Then, one evening, just a few days before the wedding, Theo walked past the study and caught Autumn hurriedly closing his father's laptop. She jolted the moment she saw him in the doorway, a flicker of guilt flashing across her face, so quick that anyone else might have missed it. But not Theo. "Oh, Theo," she said brightly, too brightly. "You startled me. I was just checking a few wedding RSVPs." Theo nodded, but inside he didn't believe a single word. As soon as Autumn left the room, he approached the laptop. It was locked, but Theo knew his father's password. It was Theo's own birthday. Something Graham often said was, "the greatest gift of my life." One click. The screen came to life. The browsing history had been wiped clean, but one tab was still open. A web page belonging to a well-known life insurance company. Theo's stomach knotted. This had to be the insurance policy Autumn had talked about. He reached forward to dig deeper, his heart thundering in his chest, when footsteps echoed from the hallway. Startled, Theo shut the laptop immediately and turned toward the bookshelf, pretending to browse through the titles. Graham walked in seconds later, the familiar warm smile appearing the moment he saw his son. "Hey, buddy, what are you up to?" "Just looking for a book," Theo replied, and the moment the lie left his mouth, guilt twisted inside him. Lying to his father was something he hated more than anything. Graham chuckled softly, ruffling his son's hair affectionately. "That's my boy. Always got his nose in a book." He gestured toward the door. "Come on, dinner's ready." Theo followed his father out of the room, but his mind was spinning. Autumn was hiding something connected to the insurance. He needed to stop her. He had to. But how? As Theo watched Graham's back moving ahead of him down the hall, panic welled up once more. If he didn't figure out a solution soon, he might lose his father forever. The day before the wedding arrived, and the atmosphere inside Lighthouse Cottage was so heavy it felt like it could be cut with a knife. Graham was buried in last-minute details. Autumn chirped her way through calls to confirm wedding vendors. And Theo felt like he was walking through a nightmare no one else could see. He had tried, one more time, to speak to his father. But every time he opened his mouth, fear rose like a wall in his throat. What if Dad didn't believe him again? What if it only pushed Graham closer to Autumn? He even considered calling the police. But what would he say? That his father's fiancée was planning to… What, exactly? He had no solid proof, just overheard fragments, a few strange messages, and some suspicious documents he'd glimpsed on Autumn's laptop. Would that be enough to save his father, or would it just make everything worse? That night, Theo lay awake in bed, moonlight pouring through the window and casting shifting shadows across the wall. The sound of waves crashing against the rocky shore, an echo that once comforted him, now only made him feel more alone. He thought of his mother. She would know what to do. She always did. "Mom," he whispered into the darkness, "I don't know what to do. I need your help." There was no answer, only silence and the distant ocean. But in that stillness, something inside Theo hardened, like a thin, fragile thread turning into steel. His mother would not want him to give up. She would want him to protect his father, no matter the cost. Theo sat up in bed, heart racing but eyes burning with new determination. He could not let Autumn destroy his family. He could not let her hurt his father. He could not stay silent. Tomorrow, at the wedding itself, he would tell the truth. Whether anyone believed him or not, no matter the consequences, because it was the right thing to do, and it was what his mother would want him to do. With that decision carved deep into his chest, Theo's body finally began to relax. He drifted into a heavy, restless sleep. And in his dreams, he saw himself standing in the middle of the chapel, his voice echoing beneath the vaulted ceiling as he shouted, "Stop this wedding!" Sunlight in Newport filtered through the bedroom window, waking Theo from a restless, haunted sleep. For the first brief moment of waking, he forgot everything. The wedding, Autumn, the terrible plan he had overheard. But after just a few breaths, it all came crashing back, heavy and cold in his stomach. Today was the wedding. Downstairs, he heard his father moving around the house, humming a cheerful tune. The sound made Theo's heart clench. Graham Matthews was an incredible father, warm, kind, deserving of happiness. But not happiness built on lies. Not with Autumn. Never with her. In the bathroom, Theo stared at himself in the mirror. The face staring back looked older than it should have. Dark circles under his eyes, cheeks slightly hollow from weeks of stress and poor appetite. "Mom, give me strength," he whispered. Breakfast was tight, like a pulled wire. Graham talked excitedly about the ceremony, his voice bubbling with anticipation. Autumn sat across from them, smiling at all the right moments, nodding when expected, but her eyes kept flicking toward her phone, a habit Theo could no longer ignore. "You've barely touched your food," Graham noted, brow creasing. "Are you okay, buddy?" "I'm just nervous," Theo replied, forcing a mouthful of toast down. Autumn's voice swept in, syrupy, sweet, but sharp as vinegar. "Oh, poor thing. Pre-wedding jitters. Totally normal for a ring-bearer." Graham tilted his head, looking at Theo with gentle pride. "I'm so proud of you. You've handled all these changes with such maturity." Those words cut deeper than any knife. If Dad knew the truth, knew Theo was preparing to ruin his wedding, would he still be proud? After breakfast, the house turned into a whirlwind of affectionate chaos. Tyler Harrison, Graham's best friend, arrived to help him get dressed. Autumn's bridesmaids flooded in soon after, bringing laughter and clouds of perfume with them. In the midst of all the noise, Theo stayed tucked away in his room, staring at his tiny suit hanging in the closet. It looked perfect. Too perfect. Just like the entire ceremony. A soft knock sounded. "Mind if I come in?" Graham asked. Theo swallowed, trying to steady his voice. "Yes, Dad." Graham stepped inside, sharp and handsome in his black tuxedo. For a moment, Theo saw the man his mother had once loved. Steady, kind, with eyes that always held pride when they looked at his son. "I wanted to talk to you before we go," Graham said, sitting beside him. "Today is a big day. For all of us." Theo nodded, throat tight. "I know this hasn't been easy for you," Graham continued. "Losing your mom, that was the hardest thing either of us ever went through. I used to think we'd never find happiness again." Theo's eyes filled with tears. "Then Autumn came along," Graham said with a smile. "And I learned that the heart always has room for more love. Your mother will always be part of us, but Autumn brings us a new beginning." "Dad," Theo's voice trembled, "if I told you something really important, would you believe me?" Graham placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Buddy, I'll always listen to you. What is it?" This was the moment. This was when Theo could finally tell him about Trevor, the insurance, the horrifying plan. But just as he parted his lips, Autumn appeared in the doorway. She stood there in her wedding dress, breathtaking in the soft morning light. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said sweetly, too sweetly. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to check in on my two favorite men." And just like that, the moment shattered. Graham jumped to his feet, face lighting up. "You look incredible, Autumn." She smiled, but when her gaze drifted to Theo, a silent threat flickered behind her eyes. "If you say one word, you will regret it." "Let's go," Tyler called from the hall. "Don't be late to your own wedding." And with that, Theo's only chance dissolved. The little family stepped outside. Graham beaming, Autumn glowing, and Theo walking quietly behind them, his heart heavy as stone. He knew one thing for certain. If he didn't speak up today, his father might never live long enough to hear the truth. The drive from Lennox Lighthouse Cottage to St. Mary's by the Sea took only 15 minutes, but to Theo it felt longer than an entire lifetime. He sat pressed against the limousine window, watching Newport pass by in slow motion. The old historic houses, the sunlight shimmering across the water, the familiar streets where he used to walk hand in hand with his mother. "You're awfully quiet, buddy," Tyler said, trying to slip some humor into the tense air. "You're not worried about dropping the rings, are you? Because your dad told me, at his wedding, the ring bearer—" "Tyler," Graham interrupted, gentle but firm. "Maybe not right now." Tyler got the message and fell silent, but Theo could still feel the worried glances from both men settle on him. When the limousine turned into the church parking lot, Theo saw clusters of guests gathering, familiar Newport faces dressed in their best, chatting and laughing. The air was full of anticipation and joy. No one suspected a thing. No one. Except Theo. Inside, Reverend Peterson stood waiting with a warm smile. "Graham, the big day is here. Ready, son?" "More ready than ever, Reverend," Graham replied, though Theo could still see the flicker of nerves behind his father's smile. From the preparation room behind them came bursts of high-pitched laughter and excited chatter from the bridesmaids. Autumn was having the time of her life. Of course, she was. Everything was unfolding exactly according to her plan. When the guests were seated and the music began, Theo took his place beside his father at the altar. The ring pillow in his hands felt 10 times heavier than it should. Graham leaned down and whispered, "I love you, Theo. Whatever happens, never forget that." Those words struck him like a spark to dry timber. They pulled Theo back into himself, pushed the fear aside, and ignited a fierce, burning resolve. His dad loved him, and because of that, he had to do this. He had to save him. And now we return to the exact moment where everything began to shatter. Reverend Peterson's solemn voice rose. "If anyone can show just cause why this couple may not lawfully be joined in marriage, let them speak now or forever hold their peace." Theo's heart pounded like a war drum. This was his moment. Now or never. "Stop!" The words burst out louder than he intended. "Stop this wedding!" A wave of gasps rippled across the chapel. Hundreds of eyes swung toward the trembling 8-year-old boy, his small voice echoing through the terrifying silence. "Theo?" Graham turned to him, confusion and concern mixing on his face. "Buddy, what's wrong? Are you okay?" Theo shook his head hard. "No, Dad. You can't marry her. She isn't who you think she is." Autumn let out a strained laugh, the sticky, sweet, artificial kind Theo knew too well. "Oh, sweetheart, I understand. This is a big change for you. Feeling nervous about a new stepmom is normal, but trying to stop the wedding—" "It's not that!" Theo cried, voice trembling but desperate. "I heard her talking to someone named Trevor. They talked about money, insurance, and hurting you." Chaos spread like fire through dry grass. Guests whispered, gasped, frowned. Some even stood to get a clearer view. Graham's face drained of color. "Theo, where did you hear this?" Theo spoke fast, the words rushing out like a flood. "That night I couldn't sleep. I went downstairs for water. I heard Miss Autumn talking to Trevor about an insurance policy and how they would get rid of you after the wedding." Autumn laughed louder, her voice cracking like fractured glass. "Graham, you can't possibly believe this? Trevor is my wedding planner. Of course, we talk about costs, about event insurance contracts." Theo must have misunderstood. But Theo didn't move. "No misunderstanding. I saw the insurance policy on her computer. It's millions of dollars if you die. And I saw pictures of her with Trevor. They're not co-workers. Graham turned to Autumn, his eyes shattering. Autumn, is there any truth? Any part of this? Autumn's smile split like a mask cracking. The elegant facade she had worn so long finally began to fall apart. Panic flashed in her eyes, wild, trapped animal panic. And then, suddenly, her whole expression hardened, cold, sharp as a blade. Ridiculous! I don't have to stand here and listen to accusations from a spoiled child who can't handle not being the center of his father's attention. She turned toward the crowd. I'm terribly sorry for this childish outburst. Clearly, Theo is having issues we will address as a family. Graham, perhaps we should— No, Graham cut in, his voice low and firm. We will address this right now. If even a part of this is true— Autumn's eyes blazed with fury. So you choose to believe the imagination of an 8-year-old over me? The woman you love? Graham knelt so he was eye-level with Theo, his voice cracking. I love my son, and he has never lied to me. Tell me everything, Theo. And Theo told him. He told him everything. The cruelty behind Graham's back, the threats, the midnight phone call, the mysterious absences, the massive insurance documents, and finally, the pictures of Autumn with Trevor. As he spoke, Graham's face grew paler and paler, as though every drop of blood were draining out of him. The crowd fell into complete silence, each person wearing their own shaken expression. Autumn stood frozen like wax. By the time Theo finished, she was no longer the radiant bride who had walked down the aisle. She was the villain revealed. Graham asked, voice trembling, Autumn, look me in the eyes. Tell me nothing he said is true. Autumn's mouth opened, then closed. Not a word, not even breath. And in that moment, Graham understood everything. This wedding, Graham whispered, his voice breaking apart, is over. The chapel erupted. People stood, stepped back, rushed outside to call the police, and craned their necks for a better view. Autumn spun around, her white wedding dress sweeping sharply across the floor. In a split second, her eyes flashed with something ice-cold, the intent to run. Stop her! Someone shouted. But Autumn was already racing down the aisle, a desperate white blur, shoving open the church doors and vanishing into the blinding Newport sunlight. The church instantly erupted into chaos as Autumn bolted out the doors. Graham, still reeling from everything that had just unfolded, seemed to snap back into awareness. His hands trembled as he pulled out his phone and dialed 911. Yes, hello? I need to report a crime, he said, his voice cracking. My fiancée, she was planning to kill me for insurance money. She just fled from our wedding. Please find her. As Graham tried to explain the details to the dispatcher, describing Autumn and the direction she ran, Theo stood frozen. Everything had happened too fast. The truth exposed. The wedding was ruined, Autumn escaping. He had saved his father. But was the cost too high? Just minutes ago, everyone had been seated in the solemn quiet of a joyful ceremony. Now guests ran in every direction, some rushing outside to catch a glimpse of the runaway bride, others whispering in clusters, many staring at Graham and Theo with a mix of sympathy and morbid curiosity. Graham ended the call, eyes red, and turned to his son. He placed both hands on Theo's shoulders, his voice breaking. Theo, I'm so sorry. I should have listened to you sooner. I should— But he didn't get to finish. Theo threw his arms around his father's neck, clinging to him. It's okay, Dad. I'm just glad you're safe, he choked out. Graham wrapped his arms around him, holding him tight. So tight, it felt like if he loosened his grip even a little, everything would collapse. For a moment, the chaos around them faded. It was just the two of them, standing in the wreckage of what was supposed to be a perfect day. Then footsteps echoed sharply down the aisle. 2 police officers entered, their presence immediately silencing the entire church. "Mr. Matthews?" one officer asked. Graham straightened, one hand remaining protectively on Theo's shoulder. "Yes, that's me." "I'm Officer Anderson, and this is Officer Brooks," the other officer said. "We need you to tell us exactly what happened." While Graham explained the situation to the officers, Theo's attention was pulled toward the church doors. A tall man with dark hair and a scar slicing across his left eyebrow was trying to push his way through the panicked crowd. Theo recognized him instantly. Trevor, the man from the photos on Autumn's laptop, her accomplice. "Dad!" Theo tugged Graham's sleeve, whispering shakily. "Dad, that's him! That's Trevor!" Graham looked where Theo pointed. His face stiffened. The man matched Theo's description exactly. "Officers," Graham said quickly, "that man, I believe he's involved. My son heard Autumn talking to him about the plan." The officers reacted instantly. Officer Anderson stepped in front of Graham and Theo, shielding them, while Officer Brooks moved toward Trevor. "Sir, stop right there!" Trevor froze for exactly 1 second. Then he turned and ran. Officer Brooks shouted into his radio for backup and sprinted after him. Guests stood stunned as the two men disappeared through the doors, their footsteps and shouts echoing down the sloping steps outside the chapel. "Mr. Matthews," Officer Anderson said, turning back with a controlled but firm tone, "we need you and your son to come to the station to give full statements. Any details or evidence about Autumn's plan will be crucial." Graham nodded, though his face still carried the fractures of the shock. "Of course. We'll cooperate." He looked over at the guests, many still wide-eyed, whispering, or staring at him in disbelief. I don't know what to say, except that I'm sorry. I never." Tyler stepped forward, placing a solid, grounding hand on Graham's shoulder. "Dave, don't worry about anything here. I'll take care of it. You focus on Theo and on working with the police, all right?" Graham exhaled, a fragile attempt at a smile forming. "Thank you, Tyler. Honestly, I don't know what I'd do without you." The drive to the Newport Harbor Police Department felt so surreal that Theo could barely feel his own body. He sat in the back seat of the patrol car, watching the familiar streets of his hometown blur past the window. Everything was still there. The houses, the shops, the shimmering Newport coastline. But Theo's world had completely shifted. Beside him, Graham sat hollow-eyed, staring blankly out the window. The expression on his face was one Theo had never seen before, an ache so deep it seemed to hollow him from the inside out. The realization that the woman he trusted, the woman he believed he loved, had been lying from the very beginning. When they arrived at the station, father and son were led into a small room with a wooden table and a few metal chairs. Officer Anderson reassured them, "This isn't an interrogation room, just a quiet place for the two of you to tell us what happened." And over the next several hours, they reopened every page of the nightmare they had just lived through. Theo told everything. The late-night phone calls he overheard, the cruel tone Autumn used whenever Graham wasn't home, the massive insurance documents, and the photos of her with the scarred man, Trevor. He left out nothing, his voice trembling at times, but his eyes never wavering. Graham added what he knew, though each word seemed to carve deeper into him. "She asked me to increase my life insurance only a month after we got engaged," he said, his voice hollow. "She said it was to secure Theo's future if anything happened to me. I thought she was being thoughtful." He stopped, burying his hands in his hair. "She also pushed me to do dangerous things, mountain climbing, skydiving, even swimming with sharks on our honeymoon. I thought she just liked adventure. I never imagined this." Theo reached out and squeezed his father's hand. Graham gave him a weak but grateful smile, because this 8-year-old boy had seen what he could not. As the sun dipped lower, new information began to arrive. Officer Brooks had caught Trevor only a few blocks from the church. Under pressure, he broke quickly and confessed everything. The truth was even darker than Theo or Graham had imagined. Autumn was not Autumn. Her real name was Melissa Sinclair, a career con artist who seduced wealthy men, drained them dry, then vanished. Trevor wasn't just an accomplice. He was her longtime lover. Their plan with Graham was the biggest one yet. Convince him to revise his will, leaving everything to Melissa. Increase his life insurance policy. Stage an accident during the honeymoon. Collect millions in payout. Disappear and start a new life. When Officer Anderson laid all of this out in black and white, Graham nearly collapsed into his chair. How could I have been so blind? He whispered, almost to himself. How did I not see any of this? Officer Anderson set his pen down and looked at him with genuine compassion. Mr. Matthews, these people are extremely skilled. Manipulating others is how they survive. What matters is that their plan didn't succeed, because of your son. Graham looked at Theo. In his eyes was pain, pride, and guilt for not believing him sooner. Theo saved my life, he said, voice cracking. I just wish I had listened to him earlier. Theo leaned into him. It's okay, Dad. We're safe now. As they were preparing to leave, Officer Anderson handed Graham a business card. If you remember anything else, or if Melissa tries to contact you, call me immediately, day or night. Graham slipped the card into his pocket, then rested a hand on Theo's shoulder. Let's go home, buddy. Today's been long enough. Theo nodded. He no longer felt like an 8-year-old child. He felt like someone who had stood against a storm and survived. The next few weeks passed like a whirlwind. Graham and Theo's lives were completely shaken as they dealt with the aftermath of Autumn's deception. It was one police interview after another, followed by meetings with attorneys, all in an effort to untangle the legal chaos she had left behind. The phone wouldn't stop ringing. Friends, family members, even reporters, everyone wanted to know what had really happened on the wedding day. Graham did everything he could to shield Theo from the worst of it, but neither of them could escape one truth. Autumn was still out there. She had vanished as if she'd evaporated into thin air. The police continued to provide updates, but as the days blurred into weeks, the hope of finding her slowly faded. Trevor, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. Arrested and facing a long list of charges, he quickly opted for a plea deal. In exchange for a lighter sentence, he revealed everything. Autumn's past, the scam network, the wealthy men they had drained across the country. Trevor's testimony exposed a criminal operation that had been running for years, leaving behind broken hearts and empty bank accounts. For Theo, the aftermath of the ruined wedding was a tangle of emotions, relief that his father was safe, but also an ever-present fear that Autumn might return someday. Graham, always attentive, noticed immediately. He installed a new security system in the Lennox Lighthouse cottage. Cameras, motion sensors, automatic lights, anything that might make Theo feel safer. And he constantly reminded him that no matter how small a worry might be, he could always come to him. "We're a team, buddy," Graham would say, ruffling Theo's hair. "You and me against the world, remember?" Theo would nod, and each time he did, the fear inside him retreated just a little more. Time slowly moved on, and life began to find a new rhythm. Graham threw himself into work at the architecture firm, taking on extra projects to keep his mind busy. Theo went back to school, rediscovering comfort in the familiar routine of homework and classes. One Saturday morning, about a month after the disastrous wedding, the two of them were having breakfast when the doorbell rang. Graham stiffened. Alertness had become instinct, but relaxed when the door camera revealed Tyler standing outside. "How are you two holding up?" Tyler asked as he stepped inside. Graham offered a tired but genuine smile. "We're managing. Come in." In the kitchen, Theo was finishing his bowl of cereal. Tyler greeted him with a fist bump. "Hey, champ, holding up okay?" Theo smiled, bumping fists back. He had always liked Tyler, one of the few adults who didn't treat him like just a kid. Tyler sat down and accepted the coffee Graham handed him. "Actually, I came over for a reason," he said. "The guys and I were talking, and we think it's time for the two of you to get out of the house for a bit. How about a camping trip this weekend?" Graham looked at Tyler, uncertain. "I don't know. After everything that's happened—" "That's exactly why you need to go," Tyler insisted. "Just a few days. No phones, no reporters, no lawyers, just friends, a couple of tents, and the outdoors." Theo's eyes lit up, an expression Graham hadn't seen in weeks. Do we get to go fishing?" he asked softly, his voice threaded with hope. Tyler laughed. "Not only that, we're going to catch enough fish to feed an army." Graham looked at his son. The excitement shining in Theo's eyes softened something deep in his chest. Maybe Tyler was right. Maybe what they needed wasn't another meeting or another stack of paperwork, but a deep breath, a stretch of open sky, a reminder that life still held beauty. "All right," Graham said, a real smile breaking across his face for the first time in days. "We'll go." And just like that, Theo's eyes lit up as if the sun had risen inside him. The camping trip turned out to be exactly what Graham and Theo needed. Far away from all the reminders of autumn's betrayal, father and son felt their bodies truly relax for the first time in months. They spent long days hiking through pine forests, fishing along the shoreline, and telling stories beside the crackling campfire carried by the ocean breeze. Theo was thrilled to learn how to set up a tent and roast marshmallows until they were perfectly golden instead of burnt, while Graham rediscovered the quiet peace that came from hearing his son laugh, a sound he had feared was lost for good. On the final night at Cape Cod National Seashore, when only the glowing embers remained, Graham gently pulled his son closer. "Thank you, buddy," he said in a low, warm voice. Theo looked up, eyes wide with confusion. "Thank me? For what, Dad?" Graham smiled, the firelight reflecting in his eyes, making them shimmer with unspoken gratitude. "For being you. For the courage I didn't have in that moment. For saving both of us." Theo rested his head on his father's shoulder, the familiar warmth loosening something tight in his chest. "We saved each other, Dad," he whispered, honest and soft, straight from the heart. The next morning, as they drove back home with the windows cracked open and the ocean wind drifting in with its scent of salt and freedom, both Graham and Theo felt as though a fog had finally lifted from their minds. The shadow of autumn still existed, lurking somewhere in the background of their lives, but it no longer swallowed them whole, no longer made them hold their breath every time they walked through the door. They had weathered the storm together, and more importantly, they were returning home stronger, closer, and ready to face whatever came next. Life slowly moved forward. Theo started a new school year, throwing himself into his studies and a whole new circle of friends. Graham, following his therapist's advice, began tentatively exploring the idea of dating again. Each step cautious, slow, as if he were walking across thin ice. Then, 6 months after the disastrous wedding day, everything shifted again. One chilly autumn afternoon, just as dusk settled across the sky, Officer Anderson appeared at their door. His face carried a heaviness that made Graham's stomach twist before a single word was spoken. "Mr. Matthews," Anderson said, as Graham opened the door and stepped aside to let him in. "We've found Autumn." Graham's heart pounded. "You've arrested her?" Anderson shook his head. "No, sir. We found her body. In a motel outside Vegas. It appears she took her own life." The news hit Graham like a punch to the chest. He staggered half a step back and had to brace himself against the wall. She's dead?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Yes, sir," Officer Anderson confirmed. "It seems she'd been there for a few days. We also recovered a letter." Just then, Theo came down the stairs. He froze when he saw a police officer standing in the living room. "Dad?" he asked, voice trembling. Graham turned, his face pale. Theo, maybe go back to your room for a moment. Dad needs to talk to Officer Anderson. But Theo stared at them, worry flooding his brown eyes. It's about Miss Autumn, isn't it? Graham sighed. There was no reason to hide it anymore. He motioned for Theo to come closer. Yes, buddy. Come here. We should talk about this together. The three of them sat down on the sofa. Officer Anderson explained what they knew, omitting the harshest details on purpose. Autumn, Melissa, had been on the run for months, always staying one step ahead of authorities. But the pressure, the fear, and perhaps the weight of guilt had finally consumed her. In the letter, Officer Anderson continued, his tone softer, she wrote that she regretted what she'd done, that she couldn't live with the guilt any longer. Graham sat still, his arm wrapping gently around Theo's shoulders. The boy looked up at him with wide, anxious eyes. Dad, are you okay? Theo asked quietly. Graham forced a faint, fragile smile. I'm not sure, buddy. This is a lot to take in. After Officer Anderson left, with a promise to update them on any further developments, Graham and Theo sat together in silence for a long time. The fading afternoon light streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the living room floor, while their minds churned with questions that had no clear answers. Dad, Theo finally whispered, do you think she really was sorry? Graham leaned forward, elbows on his knees, rubbing a hand through his hair, a gesture that carried exhaustion deep to the bone. I don't know, son. People can be complicated. Some do terrible things and later feel real remorse. Some don't. But what matters most is, he looked directly at Theo, what we learn from all of this, and how we keep moving forward. Theo nodded gently, resting against his father, and in that quiet moment, they both understood that no matter how dark the past had been, they still had each other. The news of Autumn's death marked a turning point for Graham and Theo. It brought a sense of closure, yet also unleashed waves of complex emotions that the two of them would spend a long time unraveling. They attended therapy sessions together, learning to name what they felt, learning to lean on each other instead of hiding things away. Graham became more devoted than ever to being a father, cherishing every small moment with Theo. He also made an effort to reconnect with old friends, the ones he had unintentionally pushed away during the period when Autumn manipulated him, slowly rebuilding the support network he once had. As for Theo, he blossomed. No longer burdened by secrets, no longer haunted by a quiet, constant fear, he grew more open, more spirited. His grades soared, and he discovered a new passion: mystery novels. He often joked with his dad that he already had real-life experience solving crimes. When the one-year anniversary of the ruined wedding arrived, Graham and Theo decided to create a tradition just for the two of them. They packed a simple picnic, drove to a beautiful state park, and spent the entire day hiking, fishing, and simply being together. No pressure, no shadows of the past. As the sun began to set, the two of them sat beside a crystal-clear lake, the water reflecting warm shades of gold and orange. Graham leaned slightly toward Theo. You know, Theo, I've been thinking a lot about what happened last year. Theo looked up, curious. And I realized something important, Graham continued, his eyes catching the golden glow of dusk. What Autumn did was terrible, but in a way, it taught me the biggest lesson of my life. What is it, Dad? Theo asked softly, with sincere interest. Graham smiled and brushed a hand gently through his son's hair. That the relationship I need to protect the most, to prioritize above all else, is right here. He tapped lightly over Theo's chest, as if marking something sacred. You and me. We're a team, and nothing will ever change that. Theo beamed, wrapping his arms around his father. I love you too, Dad, he whispered. I love you more than you know, Graham replied, his voice deepening with emotion. As they packed up the picnic basket, climbed into the car, and drove away from the lake, a strange and peaceful stillness settled over them, gentle, like the first breath after a long storm. The past year had been a roller coaster filled with sudden drops, betrayal, fear, loss, and then hope. But it was also the year that forged a bond between father and son, stronger than anything they had ever imagined. As the car rolled down the road toward home, the setting sun painted the sky in sweeping streaks of brilliant color, orange, pink, and soft lavender. And in that moment, both Graham and Theo understood that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them side by side. And that alone was enough. Their story is a story of hope, a small but unwavering light, proving that even in the darkest moments, truth and love still have the power to guide us forward. If you found Graham and Theo's journey inspiring, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next story. Stories about humanity, truth, and the small moments that can change an entire life. See you in the next video. Thank you for watching until the end. You are amazing.